The candlelight flickered against Zara Dalton's face as her needle moved through the heavy fabric, each stitch a prayer for survival in this unforgiving Texas town of Wilson in the year 1879. Her fingers were raw from endless hours of mending shirts, patching trousers, and hemming dresses for the few townspeople who could afford her services. But she could not stop, because stopping meant going hungry tomorrow. The small room above the general store was all she could afford, barely large enough for her narrow bed, a wooden chair, and the small table where she worked through the night while others slept peacefully in their homes. She had arrived in Wilson 6 months ago after her father died of fever on the journey from Missouri, leaving her with nothing but a trunk of belongings and the sewing skills her mother had taught her before consumption took her 3 years earlier. At 22 years old, Zara found herself completely alone in a world that had little patience for single women without family or fortune. The proprietor of the general store, Mr. Henderson, had taken pity on her and allowed her to rent the cramped space above his establishment for a reduced rate in exchange for mending his family's clothing. It was charity disguised as business, and while her pride stung, her stomach was grateful. The candle burned lower as midnight approached, and Zara's eyes strained in the dim light. She had 3 more shirts to finish before morning when their owners would come to collect them. The price she charged was barely enough to cover her rent and food, but she could not ask for more when most people in Wilson were struggling themselves. The cattle drives had been poor this year, and the railroad had bypassed their town for a larger settlement 20 miles north, leaving Wilson in a slow decline that everyone could feel, but no one wanted to acknowledge. A sound from the street below made her pause, her needle hovering above the fabric. Hoofbeats, slow and steady, coming to a stop directly beneath her window. Zara set down her sewing and moved to the small window, careful to stay hidden behind the thin curtain. A lone rider dismounted from a large chestnut horse, his silhouette tall and broad-shouldered in the moonlight. He tied his horse to the post and looked up at the buildings surrounding him, as if memorizing every detail of the sleeping town. She watched as he stretched his back, the gesture speaking of long days in the saddle. Then he walked toward the hotel across the street with a slight limp that suggested an old injury. Something about his solitary presence resonated with her own loneliness, 2 souls awake while the world slept around them. Zara returned to her sewing, pushing away the momentary distraction. She could not afford to wonder about strangers when she had work to complete. The next morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it the harsh reality of another day. Zara delivered the mended shirts to their owners, collecting her meager payment with as much dignity as she could muster. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, looked at the stitching with a critical eye before grudgingly admitting it was acceptable work. The coins she pressed into Zara's palm were still warm from being clutched in her tight fist, as if parting with money caused her physical pain. Zara was walking back toward her room when she noticed the stranger from the night before standing outside the sheriff's office. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were trail-worn but well-made, and he wore his gun with the casual ease of someone who knew how to use it but did not draw attention to the fact. Something about his eyes caught her attention, a deep sadness that seemed at odds with his strong bearing. He looked up as she passed, and their gazes met for a brief moment. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and searching, and in that instant, Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition she could not name. Then she lowered her gaze and hurried past, her heart beating faster than it should for such a simple exchange. That evening brought new work to her door. Mr. Henderson himself climbed the narrow stairs to her room with an apologetic expression, and a bundle of clothing that smelled of horses and trail dust. "Miss Dalton, I hope you will forgive the liberty, but there is a gentleman staying at the hotel who needs some mending done urgently. His regular clothes are in poor condition after a long journey, and he has asked if anyone in town does quality work. I naturally thought of you." Zara took the bundle, her fingers immediately assessing the fabric quality. These were expensive clothes, made by skilled hands in a proper city, not the rough work shirts she usually mended. A white shirt with a torn sleeve, 2 pairs of trousers that needed hemming and patching, and a vest with buttons that needed replacing. "I can have these ready by tomorrow evening," she said, already calculating how many candles she would need to work through the night again. "The gentleman said he would pay double your usual rate for quick work," Mr. Henderson added, his eyes sympathetic. He knew her situation, knew how desperately she needed every cent. "That is very generous," Zara replied, trying to keep the relief from her voice. Double payment would mean she could buy extra kerosene for her lamp, and perhaps some better food than the bread and thin soup that had become her daily sustenance. After Mr. Henderson left, Zara spread the clothes across her bed and examined them more carefully. The stitching was excellent, the fabric of high quality, and the cut was fashionable for a man of means. Whoever this gentleman was, he had fallen on hard times or had traveled through harsh conditions to reduce such fine clothing to this state. As she worked, she found herself wondering about the owner, imagining what kind of man would wear such things. She lit her candle as darkness fell and began the careful work of mending the torn shirt sleeve. The tear was clean, as if caught on something sharp, and the fabric around it was stained with what looked like old blood. Zara felt a chill run through her. Violence was not uncommon in Texas, but seeing its evidence so directly reminded her how dangerous this world could be for everyone, not just vulnerable women like herself. Hours passed in the silent concentration of her work. The needle moved through the fabric in small, precise stitches that would make the repair nearly invisible. Her mother had taught her that mending was an art form, that taking care to do the work properly showed respect for both the garment and its owner. Even in her desperate circumstances, Zara held to that teaching. It was one of the few things she had left of her mother's legacy. A knock on her door made her jump, the needle pricking her finger. She gasped at the sudden pain and put her finger to her mouth, tasting blood. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Miss Dalton, are you awake?" The voice was male, deep and unfamiliar. Zara's heart raced as she stood, moving cautiously toward the door. It was past midnight and no respectable person would call on a single woman at this hour. "Who is there?" She called through the door, grateful for the heavy bolt Mr. Henderson had installed. "My name is Henry Hammond. Mr. Henderson said you were mending my clothes. I apologize for the late hour, but I wanted to add another item if you are willing." The stranger from earlier. Zara hesitated, her hand on the bolt. Every instinct warned her not to open the door to a strange man in the middle of the night, but something in his voice suggested genuine need rather than ill intent. She opened the door a crack, keeping her body behind it as a barrier. Henry Hammond stood in the narrow hallway, a coat draped over his arm. The lamplight from her room fell across his face, and she could see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes and mouth. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in weeks. "I would not disturb you if it were not important," he said, his voice quiet and respectful. "I have a meeting with the bank tomorrow, and I need this coat mended. I will pay extra for the inconvenience." Zara looked at the coat, saw the torn lining and missing buttons, and made a decision that was probably foolish but felt right. She opened the door wider and took the coat from him. "I can have it ready by morning," she said. "I am grateful, Miss Dalton." He paused, his eyes moving past her to the candle burning on her work table, the pile of mending, the evidence of her late-night labor. Something shifted in his expression, a softness that had not been there before. "You should not have to work by candlelight. It will ruin your eyes." "I manage as I must," Zara replied, her voice firmer than she felt. She did not need pity, especially not from a stranger who knew nothing of her struggles. "I meant no offense," Henry said quickly. "Only that I know something of working through the night to survive. It takes a toll that is not always visible." Their eyes met again, and in that moment Zara saw past the well-dressed exterior to the lonely man beneath. He was alone too, she realized. Whatever had brought him to Wilson, he carried his own burdens. "Good night, Mr. Hammond," she said softly, stepping back to close the door. "Good night, Miss Dalton, and thank you." Zara closed and bolted the door, then leaned against it, her heart still racing. She moved back to her table and spread the coat out, examining it carefully. The fabric was heavier than the other items, designed for cold weather, and the lining was silk. This was a man's best coat, the kind worn for important occasions. The fact that he needed it mended for a bank meeting suggested his circumstances were more complicated than his appearance indicated. She worked through the rest of the night, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency despite her tiredness. The sky was beginning to lighten when she finally set down her needle, the last button secured, the torn lining invisibly mended. She allowed herself a moment to admire her work before folding the coat carefully and adding it to the pile of finished mending. A few hours of sleep, then she would rise and prepare to return the clothes to their owner. Zara blew out the candle stub and lay down on her narrow bed, still fully clothed. She was asleep within minutes, too exhausted to do more than pull a thin blanket over herself. The sun was high when she woke, startled by a knocking on her door. Zara sat up quickly, disoriented and embarrassed to have slept so late. She smoothed her dress and hair as best she could before opening the door. Henry Hammond stood there again, but this time in the daylight she could see him more clearly. He was handsome in a rugged way, his face all strong lines and serious expression. His eyes were the same stormy gray she had noticed before, and they studied her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "Mr. Hammond, I apologize. I meant to bring your things to the hotel this morning, but I overslept. Please, do not apologize. Mr. Henderson told me you work until dawn most nights. I should not have added to your burden with my late request." He gestured to the bundle in his arms. "I brought breakfast. I thought perhaps you might not have eaten yet." Zara stared at the package, then at him, confused by this unexpected kindness. "That is very thoughtful, but I cannot accept." "Why not? I am grateful for your excellent work and I can afford to share a meal." "There is no obligation or impropriety intended, I assure you." His voice was gentle, patient. "When did you last eat a proper meal, Miss Dalton?" The question, asked so directly, made tears sting Zara's eyes. She could not remember. "A few days ago, longer." She blinked them back, determined not to show weakness. "I will get your clothes," she said, turning away from him and from the offer that felt too much like charity. "Please," Henry said, and something in his voice made her stop. "I know what it is to be proud and hungry. I know what it is to work until your body gives out because the alternative is worse. Let me help, not out of pity, but because I wish someone had helped me when I needed it most." Zara stood frozen, her back to him, fighting the war between her pride and her desperate need. Finally, she nodded once, a small movement that nonetheless felt like a surrender. Henry entered her small room, and she was acutely aware of how poor it must appear to someone who wore such fine clothes. But if he noticed or judged, he gave no sign. Instead, he unpacked the bundle, revealing still warm biscuits, butter, jam, bacon, eggs, and a pot of hot coffee. "The hotel kitchen is surprisingly good," he said conversationally, as if sharing breakfast with a strange woman in her tiny room was perfectly normal. "I have been staying in a lot of hotels over the past few months, and this one ranks among the better ones." Zara gathered his mended clothes and laid them on the bed, then turned to face him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the breakfast and for your kindness. You are welcome." Henry handed her a plate with generous portions of food. "Please, sit and eat. You can tell me about Wilson while we breakfast." They sat at her small table, which suddenly felt intimate with two people crowded around it. Zara tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but the food was so good, and she was so hungry that it took all her willpower not to devour it like a starving animal. Henry ate his own meal and talked casually about his journey to Wilson, how he had come from Wyoming where he had been working on a ranch. "I am looking to start my own place," he explained, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. "I have saved for years, and I heard there was good land available near Wilson. I have a meeting with the banker today to discuss a loan for the rest of what I need." "That is why you need your coat mended," Zara said, understanding now. "Exactly. First impressions matter, especially when you are asking someone to trust you with their money." Henry smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. "Your work is excellent, Miss Dalton. You could charge more for such quality." "The people of Wilson cannot afford more," Zara replied. "Most are struggling as much as I am." "Then perhaps you are in the wrong town," Henry said thoughtfully. "A larger city would have more customers who could pay what your work is worth." Zara shook her head. "I have no money to travel, and even if I did, a woman alone in a big city faces different but equally difficult challenges. At least here, people know me. Mr. Henderson and a few others look out for me." Henry was quiet for a moment, studying her with those intense gray eyes. "How did you end up here?" So Zara told him, the words coming more easily than she expected. She told him about her father's dream of starting fresh in Texas, about the fever that took him on the journey, about arriving in Wilson with nothing and no one. She told him about the long nights of sewing by candlelight, about the fear that she would not be able to pay rent, about the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. "I am sorry," Henry said when she finished. "Life should not be so hard for someone who works as diligently as you do." "Life is hard for many people," Zara replied, thinking of the widows and orphans she had seen in Wilson, of the farmers whose crops had failed, of the cowboys who came through town with nothing but the clothes on their backs. "I am not unique in my struggles." "No," Henry agreed. "But that does not make your struggles any less real or difficult." They finished their breakfast in comfortable silence, and when Henry stood to leave, he left payment for his mending on the table. Zara looked at the money and gasped. It was 3 times what she had expected, far more than double her usual rate. "Mr. Hammond, this is too much." "It is exactly what your work is worth," Henry replied firmly. "And please call me Henry. Mr. Hammond makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Zara," she said, standing and facing him. "Thank you, Henry, for the breakfast and for your generosity. Thank you, Zara, for the excellent work and the pleasant company." Henry picked up his mended clothes, examining the coat with approval. "This is beautifully done. You have a real gift." After he left, Zara sat down at her table and counted the money again, hardly believing her good fortune. For the first time in months, she could breathe a little easier. She could buy kerosene for a proper lamp instead of working by candlelight. She could purchase better food. She could save a little for emergencies. But more than the money, she found herself thinking about Henry Hammond, about the way he had looked at her with respect rather than pity, about his quiet kindness and the loneliness she had recognized in his eyes. She told herself not to be foolish, that he was simply a kind man passing through town, that she should not read more into his gesture than simple human decency. But her heart, so long starved of connection, had already begun to hope. The days that followed brought subtle changes to Zara's routine. She bought a proper kerosene lamp from Mr. Henderson, who smiled knowingly when she made the purchase. The light it cast was steady and bright, making her evening work much easier on her eyes. She also bought better food and allowed herself the luxury of eating until she was truly full rather than just taking the edge off her hunger. Henry remained in Wilson, and Zara learned from town gossip that his meeting with the banker had gone well. He had secured a loan to purchase a ranch property 5 miles outside of town, a place that had been abandoned when its previous owner died without heirs. The land needed work, but it had good water and adequate grass for cattle. Henry spent his days riding out to the property and his evenings at the hotel, often taking his dinner at the small restaurant attached to it. Their paths crossed frequently in the small town. Henry would tip his hat and greet her with a warm smile whenever they passed on the street. Sometimes he would stop to talk, asking about her work or telling her about his progress on the ranch. These brief conversations became the highlight of Zara's days, moments of connection in her otherwise solitary existence. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after their first meeting, Henry appeared at her door again. This time he carried a large bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I hope I am not disturbing you," he said when she opened the door, "but I have a proposition for you." Zara invited him in, curious about what he might propose. Henry set the bundle on her table and unwrapped it, revealing bolts of fabric in various colors and patterns. "I have been thinking," he said, his expression serious but hopeful. "You are an excellent seamstress, but you spend all your time mending other people's worn-out clothes for pennies. What if you made new clothes instead? Proper dresses and shirts that people would pay good money for." Zara stared at the beautiful fabric, her fingers itching to touch it. "I cannot afford material like this. Even if I could, who in Wilson would buy such things?" "I bought the fabric," Henry explained. "Consider it an investment. You make the clothes, we sell them in larger towns where people have money to spend, and we split the profit. I can travel to deliver them when I go to buy supplies or cattle for the ranch." "Why would you do this?" Zara asked, suspicious despite herself. "What do you gain from helping me?" Henry was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I told you I know what it is to struggle. When I was 19, I lost everything in a poker game my father made in a drunken stupor. Our farm, our home, everything. My mother died of heartbreak within a year, and my father drank himself to death a year after that. I have spent the last 8 years working myself to the bone to get back what was lost." He looked at her directly, his gray eyes intense and honest. "During those years, there were people who helped me when they had no reason to do so. A rancher who gave me work when I was half-starved and desperate. A widow who taught me how to manage money and save for the future. A banker who took a chance on lending to a man with nothing but determination and a worn-out saddle. I would not be here, would not have this chance at my own ranch without their kindness." Henry gestured to the fabric. "I see the same determination in you that those people must have seen in me. You work until dawn to survive. You take pride in your craft. You do not complain or give up despite how hard things are. You deserve a chance to thrive, not just survive. And honestly, it is also a good business opportunity. Quality clothing made by skilled hands will sell well in the right markets. Zara felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by his faith in her and by the opportunity he was offering. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes," Henry replied with a smile. "Say you will take this chance and see where it leads." "Yes," Zara whispered, then stronger. "Yes, I will do it." Henry's smile widened, and he looked genuinely happy. "Good. Now, let us discuss what kinds of things would sell best." They spent the next hour planning, their heads bent together over the fabric as they discussed designs and markets. Henry had a good head for business, understanding instinctively what people would pay for and what would merely gather dust on a shelf. Zara contributed her knowledge of construction and style, explaining what was fashionable and what was practical. "I will start with shirts for men," she decided. "They sell consistently, and I can make them quickly. Then perhaps some simple dresses that could be worn for Sunday best by farm wives and town women. Nothing too elaborate, but nicer than what they can make themselves." "That sounds perfect," Henry agreed. "I will be traveling to San Antonio in 2 weeks to look at cattle. That would be a good place to try selling some of your work." After Henry left, Zara sat surrounded by the beautiful fabric and allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Real hope. Not just the desperate clinging to survival that had sustained her through the dark months since her father's death. This was hope for a future that might hold more than candlelight and hunger and loneliness. She began work immediately, her skilled fingers measuring and cutting with confident precision. The fabric was a joy to work with, so different from the worn, rough materials she usually handled. She decided to make 3 shirts first, each in a different style to appeal to different tastes. One would be plain and practical, perfect for a working man who wanted something better than rough cotton but could not afford silk. One would be slightly more fashionable, with pleating and fine buttons, suitable for a merchant or professional man. The third would be elegant enough for formal occasions, with French cuffs and a high-quality collar. The work absorbed her completely, and for the first time in months, she was not sewing to survive but sewing to create something beautiful. The difference in her mindset transformed the labor from drudgery into joy. She worked late into the night, but now under the steady glow of her kerosene lamp, rather than by flickering candlelight. The light Henry's money had bought her was already changing her life in small but significant ways. Over the following days, Henry stopped by frequently to check on her progress. Sometimes he brought food, which they would share while discussing business. Other times he simply came to talk, to share stories of his day working on the ranch, or to listen to Zara's ideas for future designs. These visits became the anchors of her days, moments she looked forward to with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the growing feelings she was developing for him. She noticed things about him that spoke to his character. The way he was always respectful, never entering her room without clear permission, and always leaving the door open when he visited to protect her reputation. The way he spoke to everyone in town with equal courtesy, whether they were the banker or the stable boy. The way his face would light up when he talked about his plans for the ranch, about raising cattle and horses, about building something lasting and good. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, with an expression that made her heart race and her breath catch. It was not the predatory look some men gave her, evaluating her worth as a commodity. It was something deeper, warmer, as if he saw her as a whole person worthy of respect and admiration. As if he saw not just her circumstances but her strength and determination in facing them. 2 weeks passed quickly, and Zara completed 6 shirts and 3 dresses. The work was some of her best, each piece carefully crafted to showcase both the beautiful fabric and her considerable skill. Henry examined each item with approval, running his hands over the seams and checking the quality of the stitching. "These are outstanding," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "They will sell well, I am certain of it." "I hope so," Zara replied, trying to mask her nervousness. So much was riding on this venture, not just financially but emotionally. If it succeeded, it would prove that her skills had value beyond mere survival. If it failed, she would be right back where she started, sewing by lamplight to earn enough for tomorrow's bread. "I leave for San Antonio in the morning," Henry said, carefully folding the clothes and placing them in his saddlebag. "I will be gone for about 10 days, but when I return, I am confident I will have good news and money from sales." "Be safe," Zara said, surprised by how much she meant it. The thought of something happening to him on the journey filled her with unexpected dread. Henry looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had grown over the past weeks. "I will be careful," he promised. "And I will think of you while I am gone." The confession, simple and honest, made Zara's cheeks warm. "I will think of you too," she admitted, surprised by her own boldness. Henry reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Zara, I want you to know that helping you has been more than just business for me. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and talent, it has meant more than I can easily express. When I return, I hope we can talk about more than just business arrangements." "I would like that very much," Zara whispered, her hand trembling slightly in his. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it softly, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply romantic. "Until I return, then." After he left, Zara sat at her table, her hand still tingling from his kiss. She was falling in love with Henry Hammond, she realized. Perhaps she had been falling since that first night when she saw him arrive in Wilson, a lone rider in the moonlight. Perhaps it was when he brought her breakfast and treated her with respect when he had no reason to do so. Perhaps it was in the 100 small kindnesses he had shown her, or in the way he believed in her when she had almost stopped believing in herself. The 10 days of his absence passed slowly. Zara continued her regular mending work while also starting new pieces with the remaining fabric. She made more shirts and dresses, experimenting with different styles and designs. She also made something else, working in secret whenever she knew Mr. Henderson would not come by unexpectedly. She made a shirt for Henry, using the finest fabric from the bolts he had given her. It was blue, the color of a summer sky, and she put all her skill and care into making it perfect. Every stitch was a declaration of feelings she had not yet spoken aloud. On the 9th day, Zara was working in her room when she heard shouting from the street below. She rushed to her window and saw a crowd gathering near the hotel. Her heart sank with sudden fear. Had something happened to Henry? Had there been an accident? She grabbed her shawl and hurried down the stairs, joining the crowd. The sheriff was there, looking grim, and several men were talking all at once, their voices raised in anger or concern. Zara pushed closer, trying to hear what was being said. "Stage was robbed about 20 miles out," the sheriff was explaining. "4 masked men heavily armed. They took all the money and valuables from the passengers and the strongbox." "Was anyone hurt?" someone called out. 2 passengers were roughed up when they tried to resist, but no one was killed, thank the Lord. But the descriptions match the Carson gang. They have been working this territory for months now. Zara felt relief wash over her. Henry had ridden to San Antonio, not taken the stage. He should be safe from this danger. But her relief was short-lived as another thought occurred to her. If there were outlaws operating in the area, Henry would have to travel through dangerous territory to return home. What if he encountered them? What if they robbed him or worse? She spent a sleepless night worrying, her imagination conjuring every possible disaster. By morning, she had convinced herself that something terrible had happened, that Henry was lying hurt somewhere on the trail, that she would never see him again. The irrational fear consumed her, making her realize how deeply her feelings for him ran. But that afternoon, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, a familiar figure rode into Wilson. Henry sat tall in his saddle, his horse moving at an easy pace, apparently unharmed and healthy. Zara, who had been watching from her window on and off all day, felt such relief that her knees went weak. She watched as Henry dismounted at the hotel, speaking to several townspeople who had come out to greet him. Then he looked up, directly at her window, as if he had known she would be watching. Even from this distance, she could see his smile. He raised a hand in greeting and she waved back, not caring who might see or what they might think. Within half an hour, Henry was climbing the stairs to her room, his saddlebag over his shoulder and an expression of triumph on his face. "I heard about the stage robbery," Zara said as soon as she opened the door. "I was so worried about you." "I was fine, did not encounter any trouble at all," Henry assured her, but his expression softened at her obvious concern. "But it warms my heart to know you were worried about me." He entered her room and set his saddlebag on the table, opening it with deliberate ceremony. "I have news, Zara. Good news." He pulled out his coin purse and emptied it onto the table. Gold and silver coins spilled out, more money than Zara had seen in months. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "I sold everything," Henry said, unable to contain his excitement. "Every single piece, and for excellent prices. The shirts sold within hours at a general store. The dresses took a bit longer, but a shop owner bought all 3 for his inventory, and he wants to order more." He said they were the finest ready-made dresses he had seen, that the quality rivaled custom work from a modiste. Zara stared at the money, her mind struggling to comprehend what this meant. "How much?" "After taking back what I paid for the fabric and a portion for my travel expenses, your half comes to $75, Henry said, pushing a stack of coins toward her. "And that is just the beginning. I have orders for 8 more shirts and 6 more dresses. The shop owner says if those sell as well, he will place a standing monthly order." $75. It was more than Zara usually made in 3 months of mending work. It was enough to pay her rent for half a year. It was enough to buy good food and save for the future. It was enough to prove that she had value, that her skills could earn her more than mere survival. "I cannot believe it," she whispered, touching the coins as if they might disappear. "Believe it," Henry said, his voice warm with shared joy. "Your talent has real value, Zara. This is only the beginning of what you can achieve." She looked up at him, this man who had seen her struggling by candlelight and had given her sunlight in the form of hope and opportunity. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were tears of gratitude and relief and something deeper that she could not yet name. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I do not know how to repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Henry replied, moving closer. "Seeing you happy, seeing you thrive instead of just surviving, that is payment enough." He reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks, his touch tender and careful. "Zara, I meant what I said before I left. These past weeks with you have meant more to me than business success, or ranch plans, or anything else. You have become important to me, more important than I thought possible in such a short time." Zara's heart pounded as she looked up into his gray eyes, seeing in them the same feelings that had been growing in her own heart. "You have become important to me too," she admitted. "So important that I was terrified something had happened to you when I heard about the robbery. "I am here," Henry said softly, his hands moving to cup her face. "I am safe and I am not going anywhere." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips were gentle but sure, and Zara melted into the embrace, her hands clutching his shirt to steady herself. The kiss was sweet and slow, a promise of feelings that ran deep and true. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. "I am falling in love with you," Henry whispered against her hair. "I know it has only been a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything." "I am falling in love with you too," Zara confessed, joy flooding through her at being able to speak the truth aloud. "From the first night I saw you ride into town, something in me recognized something in you." They stood there in her small room above the general store, holding each other as the evening light faded outside. For the first time since her father's death, Zara felt truly safe, truly cherished. She had spent so long sewing by candlelight just to survive. And then this lonely cowboy had come into her life and given her sunlight in every possible way. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened as they worked together to fulfill the orders from San Antonio. Zara sewed while Henry made improvements to his ranch, and in the evenings, they would spend time together, sometimes working on business plans but more often simply enjoying each other's company. They took walks around Wilson, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Henry told her about his years of struggling to rebuild what his father had lost, about the loneliness of working ranch jobs where he was always moving, never settling, never building anything permanent. Zara told him about her childhood in Missouri, about the mother who had taught her to sew, about the father who had dreamed of a better life in Texas, but had not lived to see it. Their courtship was proper by the standards of the time, always in public view, or with her door open when Henry visited her room. But the depth of feeling between them was undeniable, and soon the whole town knew that Henry Hammond was courting Zara Dalton. Some of the older women clucked their tongues about the speed of the romance, but most people seemed genuinely happy for them both. Zara was well-liked despite her poverty, and Henry had made a good impression with his respectful manner and honest business dealings. 6 weeks after Henry's return from San Antonio, he came to her room one evening with a serious expression that made Zara's heart race with anticipation and slight nervousness. "I have something to ask you," he said, taking both her hands in his. "My ranch house is nearly ready. It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm, with room to grow a family. I have a small herd of cattle now and prospects for more. I have enough money saved to support a wife, and your sewing business is bringing in good income that we could save or invest." He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "Zara, I know we have not known each other for very long by conventional standards, but I have never been more certain of anything than I am of my love for you. You are strong and talented and beautiful, inside and out. You make me want to build something lasting, not just a ranch, but a life filled with love and purpose. Will you marry me?" Zara felt joy surge through her, so intense it took her breath away. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Henry Hammond. I love you with all my heart." Henry swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the small room before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools, too happy to care about dignity or propriety. "I do not have a ring yet," Henry admitted. "I wanted to ask you first to be sure of your answer before I made the purchase, but tomorrow we will go to the jeweler and you can choose whatever you like." "I do not need anything fancy," Zara said, still clinging to him. "Just something simple that tells the world I belong to you and you belong to me." "You deserve fancy," Henry insisted. "You deserve everything beautiful and good, but I will be happy with whatever makes you happy." They decided to marry quickly, seeing no reason to wait now that they had committed to each other. The wedding was planned for 3 weeks later, giving Zara time to sew herself a dress and Henry time to finish preparing the ranch house. The whole town seemed to become involved in the preparations. Mrs. Henderson insisted on hosting a small reception at her home. The preacher's wife offered to make the wedding cake. Even Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife who had always been so critical, donated some lace from her own collection for Zara's wedding dress. Zara worked on her dress in the evenings, creating something both beautiful and practical. She chose a deep cream fabric that would be suitable for wearing to church and other occasions after the wedding. The design was elegant but simple, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that fell in graceful folds. She used Mrs. Peterson's lace to trim the neckline and sleeves, creating a delicate contrast against the heavier fabric. As she sewed, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had arrived in Wilson alone and desperate, with nothing but her skills and her determination to survive. She had sewn by candlelight through endless nights, her fingers raw and her stomach empty, fighting just to make it through another day. She had been so lonely, so scared, seeing no future beyond the next shirt to mend, the next meager payment. And then Henry had ridden into town, a lonely cowboy with his own scars and struggles, and everything had changed. He had seen her worth when she had almost forgotten it herself. He had given her opportunity and support, but more than that, he had given her love and hope and a future bright with possibility. He had taken her from candlelight to sunlight, from mere survival to a life she was excited to live. The night before the wedding, Zara sat in her small room for the last time. Tomorrow she would move to the ranch, to the home Henry had prepared for them. She would become his wife, his partner, the person he had chosen to build a life with. She looked around the cramped space that had been her world for 6 months, remembering the fear and loneliness, but also remembering the strength she had found in herself during those dark times. She had survived, and that survival had shaped her into someone stronger than she had been before. She was not just a seamstress anymore. She was a businesswoman with orders coming in regularly. She was a woman who had faced hardship and had not broken. She was worthy of the love Henry offered, not because of what he had done for her, but because of what she had done for herself in refusing to give up. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the Texas sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise good things to come. Zara dressed carefully in her new gown, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the buttons. Mrs. Henderson came to help with her hair, styling it in a becoming arrangement with a few flowers tucked into the curls. "You look beautiful, dear," the older woman said, tears shining in her eyes. "I am so happy for you. You deserve all the joy that is coming to you." The wedding ceremony took place in the small church, with most of Wilson's population crowded into the pews. Zara walked down the aisle alone, with no father to give her away, but she held her head high. She had given herself away, had chosen this man and this life of her own free will. That felt more powerful than any tradition. Henry waited at the altar in a new suit, but Zara noticed he was wearing the blue shirt she had made for him beneath his jacket. The gesture touched her deeply, this wearing of her work, her love made tangible in thread and fabric. His eyes never left her face as she approached, and the love shining in them made her feel like the most precious person in the world. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about the joining of 2 lives into one partnership. Zara and Henry made their vows with voices that were steady and sure, promising to love and honor each other for all the days of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Zara felt her heart might burst from happiness. The reception at the Henderson home was joyful and loud, with music and dancing and more food than Zara had seen in months. She danced with Henry, with Mr. Henderson, with several of the local men who wanted to wish them well. She ate cake and accepted congratulations and felt surrounded by community in a way she never had before. These people, who had once been strangers, had become her neighbors and friends. This place, which had once seemed like just another hardscrabble town where she was struggling to survive, had become her home. As the sun began to set, Henry and Zara left the party and rode out to the ranch together, Zara riding behind Henry on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. The ranch was only 5 miles from town, but it felt like entering a different world. The house Henry had built was small but sturdy, made of wood with a stone chimney. It had 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and eating space, a bedroom, and a small room that could serve as a sewing room or nursery depending on what the future brought. Henry carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the old tradition. Then he set her down carefully and lit the lamps, filling the space with warm light. The furniture was simple but well made. A table and chairs, a comfortable bed with a real mattress, shelves for storage, and a sturdy work table positioned near the window in what would be her sewing room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hammond," Henry said, pulling her into his arms. "Mrs. Hammond," Zara repeated, loving the sound of it. "My husband." They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other and marveling at how their lives had intertwined. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, they would fully consummate their marriage, giving themselves to each other with love and tenderness. But for now, they simply held each other, 2 people who had been lonely finding completion in each other's arms. The months that followed were filled with hard work, but also with joy. Henry worked long hours building his herd and improving the ranch, while Zara divided her time between sewing new pieces for the San Antonio orders and managing their household. She discovered she loved ranch life, loved the wide open spaces and the honest labor. She learned to ride a horse, to cook over a fire, to do 100 tasks she had never imagined as a town-dwelling seamstress. Her sewing business continued to grow. The San Antonio shop owner kept increasing his orders, and word of her quality work spread to other merchants in other towns. Henry made regular trips to deliver her goods and collect payment, always returning with more orders and good news. The money they were earning allowed them to expand the ranch faster than Henry had initially planned. They bought more cattle, better horses, and Henry even hired a young man named Charlie to help with the work. But the best news came 7 months after their wedding when Zara realized she was pregnant. She told Henry one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I am going to have a baby," she said softly, watching his face for his reaction. Henry's expression went from surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. He pulled her close, his hand moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Oh, Zara, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible." They talked late into the night about names and plans, about how they would need to expand the house and save for the future. Henry insisted that Zara cut back on her sewing work, worried that she was doing too much. But Zara, though touched by his concern, refused to stop entirely. Sewing was part of who she was, and she could manage both a household and a business, at least until the baby came. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Zara continued to work, though she did slow down as Henry had requested. She sewed baby clothes in between working on her orders, creating tiny gowns and blankets with the same care she gave to everything she made. Henry was attentive and protective, always making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. As her belly grew, So did the ranch. Henry's hard work and good business sense were paying off. The herd was thriving, and he had established a reputation for raising quality cattle. Other ranchers respected him, and he was beginning to be invited to participate in cattle drives and business deals that would have been closed to an unknown newcomer. In the spring of 1881, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the town doctor and Mrs. Henderson, but when Zara finally held her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. He had Henry's gray eyes and a head of dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "What shall we call him?" Henry asked, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his wife and son. "I thought we could name him James, after my father," Zara suggested. "James Henry Hammond." "James Henry Hammond," Henry repeated, trying out the name. "I think that is perfect." The first years of James's life were busy and full. Zara balanced motherhood with her sewing business, now working during his nap times and after he went to sleep at night. But she was no longer sewing by candlelight to survive. She worked by lamplight in a comfortable home, with a husband who loved her and a son who filled her days with joy. The difference was profound, not just in her circumstances but in her spirit. The ranch continued to prosper. Henry's herd grew to over 300 head of cattle, and he added horses to their operation as well. They expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor. Zara's sewing room was now a dedicated space with good light and plenty of storage for her materials. They hired a woman from town to help with the heavy household work, freeing Zara to focus on her sewing and on James. When James was 2 years old, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was expected and celebrated with equal joy, but perhaps less surprise. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, was born in the autumn of 1883. She had Zara's delicate features and Henry's serious expression, a combination that made her irresistibly charming even as an infant. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was successful enough that they no longer worried about money. Zara's sewing business had expanded to include several shops across Texas, and she had even hired 2 other women from Wilson to help with the simpler pieces, creating employment opportunities, just as Henry had once created opportunity for her. They were happy, truly happy, in a way that neither of them had imagined possible during their lonely years before finding each other. Henry would sometimes tell Zara that she had saved him as much as he had saved her, that her love and partnership had given him something to build for beyond mere survival or success. Zara knew exactly what he meant because she felt the same way. One evening, when James was 5 and Margaret was 2, the family sat together on their porch watching the sunset. James was chattering about a calf he had helped his father tend that day, while Margaret played with a rag doll Zara had sewn for her. Henry sat with his arm around Zara, contentment evident in every line of his body. "You remember the first night I saw you?" Henry asked suddenly, his voice quiet enough that the children would not hear. "You were in that little room above the general store, sewing by candlelight. You looked so tired, so thin, but you were fighting. You were not giving up." "I remember," Zara said, leaning into his embrace. "I remember thinking how lonely you looked when you rode into town, 2 lonely people passing in the night." "But we did not just pass," Henry said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We found each other. You were surviving in the darkness, and somehow we brought each other into the light. You gave me sunlight," Zara said softly. "In every way that matters, you brought light into my life when I was living in shadows. You gave me hope and opportunity and love. You gave me a future when I could barely see past the next day. And you gave me a reason to build that future," Henry replied. You gave me a home, not just a house, but a real home filled with love and laughter. You gave me children and partnership and joy. Everything good in my life now, it all started the day I met you." They sat together as the sky darkened, their children playing nearby, their ranch spreading out around them. The journey from that small room and flickering candle to this porch and this life had been neither simple nor easy. There had been struggles and setbacks, hard work and sacrifice. But there had also been love, constant and true, and that love had made all the difference. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and new challenges. A drought in 1886 tested their resilience, but they had saved wisely and managed to weather the difficult time. A bad winter in 1888 brought losses, but they rebuilt. Through it all, Henry and Zara faced challenges together, their partnership growing stronger with each test. James grew into a serious boy who loved ranch work and showed signs of becoming an excellent cattleman like his father. Margaret was more interested in her mother's sewing, often sitting beside Zara and learning to stitch, her small fingers growing increasingly skilled. In 1889, Zara gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas. He was a happy, energetic baby who kept everyone entertained with his antics. By 1890, the Hammond Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. Henry had a reputation for honesty and quality that extended far beyond Wilson. Zara's sewing business had evolved into a legitimate manufacturing operation, with 5 women working for her and orders coming in from across the state. She had proven that a woman could be both a wife and mother and a successful businesswoman, though the path had not always been easy. The town of Wilson itself had grown and prospered along with the Hammond family. The railroad had finally come through, bringing new opportunities and new people. The general store had expanded, and Mr. Henderson had retired, leaving the business to his son. The town now had a proper school where James and Margaret attended classes, learning reading and arithmetic from a teacher who had come all the way from Boston. One day in late spring, Zara was working in her sewing room while Thomas napped when Henry came in with a letter. His expression was excited but nervous, a combination that made Zara look up from her work with curiosity. "What is it?" "A letter from a business consortium in Dallas," Henry said, sitting down beside her. "They have been buying up ranches in this area, consolidating operations. They want to buy our ranch for a considerable sum of money." Zara set down her sewing, her full attention on her husband. "Do you want to sell?" "I do not know," Henry admitted. "The money would be enough to set us up anywhere we wanted. We could move to a city, give the children opportunities we cannot provide here. We could travel, see the country. We would never have to worry about drought or hard winters again." "But," Zara prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, "but this is our home," Henry said simply. "This is what we built together. Every fence post, every building, every head of cattle represents our work and our dreams. I do not know if I can just walk away from that, even for a lot of money." Zara thought about it carefully. She thought about that first night in Wilson when she had been sewing by candlelight, desperate and alone. She thought about Henry riding into town, equally alone, equally desperate in his own way. She thought about how they had built this life together, not just through good fortune but through hard work and faith in each other. "I do not want to sell," she said finally. "This is our home, our family's legacy. The children love it here, I love it here. We have everything we need, Henry. We have each other, we have our children, we have work that fulfills us and a community that values us. What would we gain by leaving all that for more money we do not actually need?" Henry's face broke into a relieved smile. "I was hoping you would say that. I did not want to sell, but I wanted to make sure you had a choice. that you are not staying just because you thought it was what I wanted." "I am staying because it is what I want," Zara assured him. "This is where we belong." So they stayed, and life continued its steady progression. The children grew older, each developing their own interests and personalities. James, at 14, was already a skilled horseman and was talking about studying animal husbandry to improve their breeding program. Margaret, now 11, had become an excellent seamstress and was helping Zara design new patterns. Thomas, at 6, was still young enough to believe he could do anything, declaring at various times that he wanted to be a cowboy, a train conductor, and the President of the United States. In 1895, Henry and Zara celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They had a party at the ranch, inviting friends from Wilson and neighboring ranches. It was a joyful evening filled with music and dancing and good food. At one point, Henry pulled Zara away from the crowd for a private moment. They stood together under the stars, in nearly the same spot where they had stood on their wedding night all those years ago. Henry took both her hands in his expression serious and tender. "I have been thinking about how to tell you what these 15 years have meant to me," he said. "But I cannot find words adequate to express it. You have given me everything, Zara. A home, children, love, purpose. You took a lonely cowboy who was just surviving and showed him how to truly live." "You did the same for me," Zara replied, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I was sewing by candlelight just to make it through another day. I had no hope, no future. And then you came into my life and gave me sunlight. You saw value in me when I had forgotten my own worth. You gave me opportunities and support and most of all, love. Everything good in my life comes from loving you." "To another 15 years," Henry said, kissing her softly. "And then another 15 after that, and another, until we are old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren. To the rest of our lives together," Zara agreed. "However many years that may be, I want to spend every one of them with you." As they returned to the party, walking hand in hand toward the lights and music and laughter of their gathered friends and family, Zara reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had survived hardship that might have broken someone else. She had worked by candlelight when that was all she had. But she had not given up, and that persistence had led her to the love of her life. Henry had been lonely too, searching for something he could not quite name, building a future without fully understanding what he was building toward. And then they had found each other, two struggling souls who recognized something fundamental in each other. Together, they had created a life that neither could have achieved alone, a partnership that was stronger than the sum of its parts. The years continued their steady march. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path. James took over more responsibility for the ranch, working alongside his father and proving to have an excellent head for business as well as cattle. Margaret expanded her mother's sewing operation, introducing new techniques and designs that increased their profit margins. Young Thomas went away to school in Austin, declaring his intention to become a lawyer so he could help protect ranchers' rights as development continued to change Texas. In 1899, Henry and Zara became grandparents for the first time when James married a neighboring rancher's daughter and they had a baby boy. Holding her grandson for the first time, Zara marveled at the fullness of her life. She, who had once been so alone and desperate, now had a family that extended through generations. She, who had once sewn by candlelight just to afford her next meal, now had prosperity and security beyond anything she had imagined possible. But the greatest gift, the one that made all the rest possible, was the man who stood beside her. Henry, Her husband of over 20 years now still looked at her with the same love and admiration he had shown from the beginning. His hair was graying at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Zara, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him ride into Wilson. They had created something lasting and good, not just a successful ranch or a profitable business, but a legacy of love and partnership that would continue through their children and their children's children. They had taken their individual struggles and transformed them into shared strength. They had taken darkness and created light. One evening, many years after their anniversary celebration, Henry and Zara sat together on their porch as had become their habit. They were older now, in their 50s, but still healthy and active. The ranch hummed around them with the activity of the next generation taking over more responsibility. Margaret lived in a house they had built for her near the main house, running the sewing operation with impressive efficiency. James lived with his growing family in another nearby house, managing the day-to-day ranch operations. Even Thomas had returned after finishing law school, opening a practice in Wilson and helping the ranch with legal matters. "You ever think about that first night?" Henry asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "When I knocked on your door at midnight asking you to mend my coat." "I think about it often," Zara admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how desperate. I think about how close I came to not opening that door, to letting fear make my decisions." "I am grateful you took the chance," Henry said, taking her hand in his. "I am grateful you let me into your life." "I am grateful you saw me," Zara replied. "Really saw me, not just my circumstances but my potential. You gave me more than opportunity, Henry. You gave me belief in myself and in the possibility of happiness." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The sky painted itself in brilliant colors, gold and orange and deep pink, the kind of stunning display that never got old no matter how many times you witnessed it. "I love you, Zara Hammond," Henry said softly. "I loved you when you were sewing by candlelight in that tiny room. I loved you on our wedding day. I loved you when you gave me our children. I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Zara replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My lonely cowboy who brought sunlight into my life. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the answer to prayers I did not even know I was praying." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Texas sky, Henry and Zara remained on their porch, two people who had found each other when both were lost and alone. They had survived hardship, built a successful life, raised a family, and created a love story that would be remembered by generations to come. Their story was not one of easy fortune or lucky breaks. It was a story of hard work and determination, of taking chances and having faith. It was a story of two people who had been struggling alone in darkness, finding each other and creating light together. It was a story of a woman sewing by candlelight to survive, and a lonely cowboy who gave her sunlight in every way that mattered. And it was a story that would continue long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the business they had created, but most of all in the example they had set of what true partnership and lasting love could achieve. The years that followed brought new joys and some sorrows, as is the nature of life. They lost friends to age and illness. They weathered economic downturns and natural disasters. But through it all, Henry and Zara remained each other's constant, their love a foundation that could bear any weight. As they entered their 60s and then their 70s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of both the ranch and the sewing business, content to let the next generation take the lead while offering guidance and wisdom when asked. They spent their time with grandchildren, teaching and playing and telling stories of the old days. Their grandchildren loved to hear about how Grandpa Henry had first come to Wilson, and how he had fallen in love with Grandma Zara, who was sewing by candlelight in a tiny room above the general store. They would ask again and again to hear about the early days of the ranch, about the struggles and triumphs, about how love and hard work had built everything they now enjoyed. Henry lived to the age of 78, passing peacefully in his sleep in the home he had built with his own hands. Zara held his hand as he took his last breath, her own heart breaking even as she felt grateful for the 55 years they had shared. He had been her love, her partner, her best friend, and she felt his loss like a physical wound. But she did not break. Henry had taught her she was stronger than she knew, and she proved it by continuing on, surrounding herself with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to sew, though now it was mostly small items for babies and repairs for family members. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, but they were still skilled, still capable of creating beauty. Zara lived another 6 years after Henry's passing, years filled with family and memory and the satisfaction of a life well lived. She spent her final years in the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their love, children who had grown into good people, a ranch that continued to thrive, a business that employed dozens of women, and a legacy of partnership and dedication that inspired everyone who knew their story. When Zara passed at the age of 82, it was with her family surrounding her bed, holding her hands and telling her how much she was loved. Her last words were about Henry, about how she could feel him waiting for her, about how she was ready to be reunited with her cowboy who had given her sunlight. They buried her beside Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch, a spot they had chosen years before. The gravestone was simple but beautiful, bearing both their names and a single inscription. Together, they found light in darkness and built a legacy of love. The ranch continued under James's leadership, and then under his sons. The sewing business continued to grow and evolve, eventually becoming a regional manufacturer of quality clothing. But more important than any business success was the family legacy that Henry and Zara had created. Their descendants remembered the story of the lonely cowboy and the seamstress working by candlelight. They remembered how two people struggling alone had found each other and created something beautiful together. They remembered that love and partnership and determination could overcome any obstacle. The small room above the general store where Zara had once sewn by candlelight to survive eventually became a kind of historical site in Wilson. A plaque was placed there, telling the story of Zara Dalton, who had lived there in 1879, who had worked through the night to earn enough to survive, and who had been discovered by Henry Hammond, a lonely cowboy new to town. It told how their meeting had led to a partnership that transformed both their lives and had a lasting impact on the community. Visitors to Wilson, particularly young couples just starting out and facing their own struggles, would visit the room and draw inspiration from the story. They would stand in that small space and imagine Zara working by candlelight, tired and hungry and scared but refusing to give up. They would imagine Henry knocking on her door that midnight and offering her a chance at something better. And they would leave with renewed hope that their own struggles were not the end of their story, but perhaps just the beginning. The ranch itself became known as the Hammond-Dalton Ranch, acknowledging both the founders. It remained in family hands for generations, a testament to what Henry and Zara had built together. The original ranch house was preserved as a family home and museum, with Zara's sewing room kept exactly as it had been when she worked there. her lamps and fabrics and tools displayed as reminders of where it all began. Every year on the anniversary of Henry and Zara's wedding, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration. They would share stories about the founders, passing down the family history to new generations. They would visit the graves on the hill and leave flowers. And they would remind each other of the core lesson that Henry and Zara's life together taught. That love combined with hard work and mutual respect could create miracles. The legacy was not just in buildings and businesses, though those were impressive. The legacy was in the values that Henry and Zara had modeled and passed down. The importance of seeing value in people beyond their circumstances. The power of offering opportunity and support to those who are struggling. The strength that comes from true partnership, where both people contribute and both people grow. The way love can transform darkness into light. Their story became a part of Texas folklore, one of those tales that captured something essential about the spirit of the frontier. It was a story about survival and hope, about loneliness finding connection, about two people who had almost nothing creating everything that mattered. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about the American dream, about building something from nothing through determination and faith. Historians who studied the period would note the Hammond-Dalton Ranch as an example of successful small ranching operations in late 19th century Texas. Economic scholars would cite Zara's sewing business as an early example of women's entrepreneurship in the West. But for the family and for the people of Wilson, the story was much simpler and much more profound. It was about two people who found each other when both were lost and created a light that continued to shine long after they were gone. The full circle of their story was completed many decades after their deaths, when a young woman, struggling to make ends meet in Wilson, was encouraged to visit the plaque above the old general store. She stood in that room, now renovated but still small and humble, and read about Zara Dalton sewing by candlelight. She learned about Henry Hammond offering opportunity and support. And she left that room with renewed determination to face her own struggles, believing that if Zara could survive and thrive, perhaps she could too. That young woman went on to start her own business, to find love, to build a life she was proud of. And when people asked her what had given her the courage to keep trying when things were hard, she would tell them about Zara and Henry, about the seamstress and the cowboy who found each other in a small Texas town in 1879, and changed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who came after. This was the true measure of Henry and Zara's legacy, not just what they built in their own lifetime, but how their story continued to inspire and encourage others long after they were gone. They had taken their individual struggles and transformed them into a shared triumph. They had taken loneliness and created connection. They had taken darkness and created light. And so the story ends where it began, in that small room above the general store in Wilson, Texas. But it is not really an ending, because the impact of that story, of those two lives intertwined, continues to ripple outward through time. Every person who learns their story and takes courage from it becomes part of their legacy. Every couple who faces hardship together and emerges stronger becomes an echo of their partnership. Every act of kindness offered to someone who is struggling continues the light that Henry brought to Zara all those years ago. She was sewing by candlelight to survive. The lonely cowboy gave her sunlight, and together they created a love that would shine forever, illuminating the path for all who followed after them. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love eternal in the memory and impact they left behind. It was a good ending, a happy ending, exactly the kind of ending that two people who had fought so hard for happiness deserved. And in the hearts of their descendants and in the history of Wilson, Texas, Henry Hammond and Zara Dalton lived on forever, two souls who found each other in darkness and created a legacy of light.